At the family dinner, my dad made a hurtful joke that left everyone laughing except me. Instead of reacting, I left quietly that night. And weeks later, when they tried to reach out, I had already moved on in ways they didn't expect. Hi, Reddit. I'm 32F, and I guess you could say I've always been the odd one out in my family. Not in a dramatic black sheep kind of way, more like a quiet puzzle piece that never quite fit into the loud, boisterous picture my parents loved to present as our family. I've always been more reserved, more thoughtful. I think before I speak, I pause before I react. In a family like mine, that gets misunderstood very quickly. For the sake of this story, I'll call myself Mira. My dad will be Ray, and my mom, Celeste. I'm the oldest of four. My siblings Dax, 30M, Lena, 27F, and Theo, 24M, all still live fairly close to our childhood home and remain deeply embedded in the family orbit. I'm the only one who moved away, and that distance, both emotional and physical, has always been seen as defiance by my parents, especially Ray. Ray is the kind of man who treats every interaction like a performance. He thrives on attention and has a sharp wit that can charm just as easily as it can wound. For as long as I can remember, he's treated family dinners like he's holding court. He'll joke about someone's job, haircut, or weight, always framed as harmless teasing. And when people laugh, which they always do, he gets this smug look, like he's convinced he's the smartest person in the room. As kids, it was hard not to laugh too. You didn't want to become his next target. You didn't want to be labeled as someone who couldn't take a joke. But over time, especially as I got older, those jokes stopped feeling harmless. They started to feel like weapons. I'll admit, I spent most of my 20s trying to please them. I held on to a steady job I didn't love, stayed close enough to attend birthdays, smiled through comments about being too sensitive or too serious, and tried not to take it personally when my parents would proudly highlight my siblings' achievements while skipping over mine. I thought that's just how family worked, you take the hits and keep showing up. But over the past year, something changed. Maybe it was burnout. Maybe it was finally allowing myself to live life on my own terms. I quit my job, moved out of the city, and started a small consulting business, something that gave me a level of freedom and independence I hadn't realized I needed so badly. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not because I was hiding it, but because I already knew how it would be received. In my family, anything outside the traditional path is seen as unstable or unserious. Anything quiet is viewed with suspicion. My parents measure success in visible, tangible ways. You have to talk about your promotion, show off your new car, casually mention your salary. That's how they define worth, by how loud and polished it appears. So when I chose to build something on my own, quietly, and stop seeking their approval, they didn't know what to make of me. Which brings me to the dinner. It was my mom's birthday, and they hosted the celebration at our old family home. It was a big gathering, not just immediate family, but extended relatives, neighbors, and old church friends. The house was full, warm with the smell of food, buzzing with overlapping conversations, and that specific kind of energy I've always found exhausting. I hadn't been home in a while. Not because I was actively avoiding them, but because I'd been busy building something new, something that finally felt like mine. The moment I walked in, I felt like a stranger in a place that used to belong to me. The photos on the walls hadn't changed, but the way people looked at me had. I got the usual greetings, polite hugs, "Wow, it's been ages," and side comments like "We weren't sure you'd show." I brought dessert, something homemade that I'd put real effort into. My mom gave me a stiff smile when she saw it. Ray glanced at the box and said, "You didn't just pick this up on the way, did you?" I laughed lightly, trying to keep things easy. Dinner was served in the dining room. The long oak table was still there, surrounded by the same mismatched chairs from when we were kids. Everyone took their seats. I ended up between my cousin Jace and Lena, who was scrolling through her phone even as we said grace. The beginning of the meal went as expected, food being passed around, people talking over each other, Ray occasionally raising his voice to keep the attention on himself. At one point, he told a story about Theo getting a flat tire and crying in the driveway. Everyone laughed. Theo rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Then someone asked Jace about his job. He works in finance and had just gotten a promotion. Ray clapped him on the back and said, "Finally, someone in this family who's going to retire before 80. More laughter followed. Then Lena started talking about a trip she was planning, and Celeste quickly jumped in to say how proud she was of how ambitious she'd become. Then, and I should have seen it coming, my mom turned to me and said, "Myra's been working on something too, haven't you?" I froze for a moment. Not because I didn't want to answer, but because I knew exactly what would follow. I gave a brief, quiet summary, just said I'd started consulting and that things were going well. Nothing exaggerated, just enough to acknowledge the question. That's when Ray leaned back in his chair, scanned the table with that familiar grin and said, "Oh, that's right. Myra's little startup. You know, the one where she works in pajamas and convinces herself she's changing the world from her couch." The room erupted in laughter. I didn't. I felt heat rise up my neck, not from embarrassment, but from the slow, quiet realization that nothing here was ever going to change. Not for me. Not in that house. Not in this family. And this time, I didn't try to explain. I didn't laugh along. I didn't correct him or try to prove that I was doing well. I didn't try to win them over. I simply placed my napkin on my plate, stood up, and said softly, "Happy birthday, Mom." Then I left. I didn't hear from any of them for 3 days. Then the messages started coming in, first from Celeste, then Dax, then Lena. All with the same tone. "Hey, are you okay? You know Dad was just joking, right? Don't be so sensitive, Mira. We missed you." But I didn't respond, because by the time they thought to reach out, I had already started making decisions none of them were prepared for. I ignored the first few messages, not to punish them, but because I needed the silence to speak for itself. I didn't want to fall back into the usual pattern, the back and forth, where I explain why I'm hurt, they tell me I shouldn't be, and it all ends with some hollow phrase like "we all tease each other" or "it's just love in disguise." I've played that role enough times to know how it ends, with me feeling like I overreacted and them walking away unchanged. So instead, I let the messages pile up while I focused on myself. My apartment, small but filled with sunlight, had never felt more like home than it did in the days after that dinner. The quiet was comforting. My mornings were spent sipping tea by the window, replying to emails from clients who respected me instead of laughing at me. My evenings were filled with small routines: baking, organizing, watching films that made me think. There was peace in the silence, even though I knew it wouldn't last. People like my parents don't tolerate being ignored, especially by someone they still see as a child. On the 5th day, Ray called. I didn't answer. 2 hours later, Celeste texted again. "It's been almost a week. Your father is worried. Please don't let one little joke drive a wedge between us." A wedge? As if that dinner comment had been the first crack. Still, I said nothing. I kept working. That week I onboarded 2 new clients and even scheduled a brand photography session for my business. I was moving forward, something I don't think any of them believed I could do. And maybe that's why, the following weekend, they showed up unannounced. I was finishing up some reports when I heard the buzz from the building's front door. I checked my phone, 2 missed calls from Dax. Then the intercom rang. I stood still, not moving. Then came a knock on my actual door. Loud. Familiar. I didn't need to check the peephole. I already knew. I opened the door slowly, and there they were. Ray stood with his arms crossed like a disappointed coach. Celeste held a store-bought pie as if it were a peace offering. And Dax stood there awkwardly, gripping his phone like he half expected to live-stream the situation. "Mira," my father said, his tone neutral. "We need to talk." I didn't step aside. He sighed, that exaggerated sigh he always used when he thought I was being difficult. "You've made your point. You're upset. But dragging this out isn't healthy. I didn't ask you to come," I replied. My voice was calm, steady. That seemed to catch them off guard. Celeste stepped forward, tilting her head slightly in that familiar way she used when trying to appear gentle. "We just want to understand, honey. This has gone too far. Your father didn't mean any harm." I stayed silent for a moment, studying them. The same polite smiles they wore when visiting relatives they didn't actually like. No real remorse, just irritation that their audience had stopped playing along. Eventually, I stepped back, not out of forgiveness, but curiosity. I wanted to hear what version of the story they were about to present. They sat stiffly on the couch while I remained standing by the kitchen island. Ray cleared his throat. "Look, Mira, you know how I am. I joke around, always have, always will. You've just gotten too serious lately." I blinked at him. You mocked my work in front of 30 people. He waved it off. It wasn't mocking. It was teasing. If you told us more about it, maybe we wouldn't be guessing. Celeste jumped in. We didn't even know what you've been doing, sweetheart. You've kept us in the dark. I folded my arms. You've never asked. And every time I shared something personal, it got turned into a punchline. Dax finally spoke, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. I mean, come on, Mira. It was a room full of people. You know how he is. Did you really expect him to sit quietly while everyone else got the spotlight? That stunned me. They didn't even try to deny it was intentional. It wasn't just a harmless joke. They knew exactly what Ray was doing, deliberately pulling attention away from anyone else and back onto himself. I was about to ask them to leave when Celeste delivered the final blow. You always make everything about you. Honestly, we've been walking on eggshells around your moods for years. You're not the only one who's been hurt in this family. That was the moment something inside me went still. Because I knew then that no matter what I said, no matter how calmly or logically I explained it, would always be twisted back onto me. Somehow, I would always be the problem, the burden, the one who was too much and not enough at the same time. I looked at them, really looked, and saw people who had never actually tried to know me, only control me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply said, "This is my home, and I'm asking you to leave." Ray stood up first, visibly irritated but still clinging to that false diplomatic tone. "We're just trying to help, but you've made it clear you'd rather sulk than be part of this family." Celeste left the pie on the counter like some symbolic offering, then walked out without another word. Dax muttered a half-hearted "see you around" and followed them. I locked the door behind them and stood there in the silence. A silence that didn't feel lonely this time. It felt earned. After that visit, I knew I needed to do more than just ignore them. They weren't going to back off unless I drew a clear boundary, a line that didn't just say "I'm hurt," but "you no longer have access to me." So I started taking quiet steps. I unsubscribed from the family group chat, blocked numbers I didn't need to hear from, and most importantly, I began preparing something none of them saw coming. Something that would make them see me differently. Something that would remind them I wasn't the weak link they thought I was. A few days after their unannounced visit, I received a letter in the mail. Not handwritten, not an apology, just a printed invitation. It was for Theo's engagement party. The envelope was thick, the kind meant to signal importance. Inside was a pale blue card embossed with silver lettering, along with a small slip that read, "We hope to see the whole family there. Love, Ray and Celeste." There was no personal note. No acknowledgement of what had happened days earlier, just the casual assumption that I would show up, smile politely, and slip back into my role as the distant but compliant oldest daughter who kept her thoughts to herself. It was so on brand for them, it almost made me laugh. Instead, I folded the invitation neatly and placed it in a drawer. Not hidden, I wanted the reminder. Because while they were busy planning their next celebration, I was quietly preparing something of my own. You see, my business, the one Ray mocked in front of a room full of people, wasn't just some small consulting side project. I had been building it for nearly 2 years, quietly and intentionally. What started as side gigs and referrals had grown into something structured, profitable, and most importantly mine. I specialized in helping mid-sized creative brands streamline their internal operations, improve efficiency, and rebrand in ways that made them scalable. I'd helped one company triple its revenue in under a year. Another client expanded internationally using the systems I implemented. I never posted about it online. Never. Brought it up at family dinners. Because I knew exactly how it would be received. They didn't value what they didn't understand. But I didn't need their understanding anymore. What I needed on finally had was leverage. And I was going to use it. It began with a quiet meeting. I reached out to a client I'd been working with for over a year, a successful boutique interior design company looking to expand into commercial spaces. The founder, Ava, had become both a client and a friend. When I shared my idea, she leaned forward, her eyes lighting up. "You want to rent a space?" she asked. "For what?" "For me," I said simply. "I'm ready to go public." I didn't mean launching with social media blasts or trying to impress strangers online. I meant opening a small professional studio, part workspace, part showcase where I could meet clients, host workshops, and finally claim a space that reflected everything I'd built. The location I had in mind was a renovated warehouse unit on the edge of the arts district, about 10 minutes from where Theo's engagement party would be held. The opening was scheduled for the same weekend. It wasn't petty, it was strategic. Over the next month, I worked quietly. I hired a branding photographer for professional headshots, commissioned new signage, ordered sleek furniture, and had custom materials made. I designed a space that felt like me, minimalist, warm, and professional. A stark contrast to the suffocating performative atmosphere of my parents' world. And while I did all this, they kept reaching out. Lena messaged every few days. "You coming to Theo's party? Don't make it weird." Celeste emailed me outfit suggestions. "Soft colors flatter you, dear. Don't wear black like you're attending a funeral." And Ray left a voicemail that still makes my stomach turn. "Mira, look, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but this weekend isn't about you. It's about Theo. Try not to bring any tension, okay? Just smile, clap when he gives his little speech, and enjoy the food. That's all anyone's asking. No apology, no accountability, just a thinly veiled directive to behave." They wanted a performance, but they weren't going to get one from me. Instead, I sent out invitations of my own, not to my family, but to a carefully selected group of clients, collaborators, former colleagues, and local professionals I'd built relationships with over the years. People who had seen my work, trusted my ability, and believed in what I was creating. The invitation read, "You're invited to the soft launch of Mira K Strategy Studio. Come celebrate the opening of a space built on quiet resilience and bold ambition." It was subtle, but if you understood, you understood. The night of the engagement party arrived. I wore a soft blue dress, not because Celeste suggested it, but because it matched the accent wall in my studio. As I moved through the space greeting guests, showing them around, answering questions about my services, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Grounded. This was my space, my pace, my rules. A few guests mentioned they had passed Theo's party on the way in. "Looked crowded," one of them said. "A bit over the top for an engagement party, don't you think?" I just smiled and nodded. I didn't need to be there standing in a corner, clapping politely while Ray made jokes about who'd get married next or whose career counted. I was exactly where I needed to be. Then came a moment I hadn't expected, a knock on the door. The soft launch was winding down. Most of the guests were chatting in small groups or preparing to leave. I opened the door, expecting a late arrival. It was Lena. She looked different, not just because of the party dress or the dramatic makeup. There was tension in her expression, like she'd just come in from a storm. "Wow," she said, stepping inside without waiting. "So this is what you've been doing?" I stayed silent, watching her take it all in. Her eyes moved around the studio, her expression shifting, part impressed, part unsettled. "I thought you were sick or something," she continued. "You skipped Theo's party. Everyone was asking where you were." I shrugged. "I had something more important to be at." She blinked. "You mean this?" I nodded. She glanced around again. "Does Dad know?" "No," I said. "Not yet." And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't just surprised. She was shaken. Because for the first time in our lives, I had done something they couldn't diminish, mock, or interfere with. I had succeeded quietly, independently, and they hadn't seen it coming. She didn't stay long. Said something about not wanting to start drama, then left with a half-hearted "congrats, I guess." But the next morning, the messages started again, different this time. From Ray, "Heard you had some kind of event last night. Interesting. Would have been nice to be invited." From Celeste, "Your brother was very hurt by your absence. You chose a work event over your own family." From Dax, "Mom's upset. You really blindsided them." Mira, "Was this about revenge?" I didn't respond, not because I had nothing to say, but because I had finally learned something important. You don't announce revenge. You live it. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Let them twist the story until they're the victims. The truth was this. While they were laughing at me at the dinner table, I was building something they would never be part of. It didn't take long for word to spread. Within a week of my soft launch, a few local blogs picked up the story. Not because I had pitched it, but because some of my early clients had connections and they believed in what I was doing. One article even called me the consultant who built quiet success without the noise. That one made me laugh. It was never about making noise. It was about building something that didn't depend on their approval, something they couldn't tear down with a smirk or a snide remark at the dinner table. I hadn't shared anything on family social channels, but others had. Photos from the event circulated, polished interiors, branded materials, and yes, me standing confidently in front of my company's name printed across the glass. That's how they found out. Ray called 3 times that day. I let each call go unanswered. Then came the message. I saw the article. So this is what all that distance was about. A little rebranding party. You couldn't even tell your own father. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Like always, he was trying to shift the focus from what he had done to how I had responded. The same pattern. The same tired tactics. Celeste sent a longer message, one that wove together guilt and quiet criticism. We were shocked to find out like this. You've clearly been busy. You should have told us. This family may not be perfect, but we've always loved you. It's hurtful that you've cut us off over a joke. Are you really going to throw away decades of family over one night? They still didn't understand. It was never about one night. It was about a lifetime of being dismissed, laughed at, overlooked, and told I was too sensitive whenever I tried to speak up. But now, things were different. And that difference became clear the following weekend. A former client of mine, someone I had helped grow from a struggling freelance designer into a 6-figure agency owner, invited me to speak at a local business leadership panel. It was a small conference, but well attended by the regional business community. I almost declined. Then I found out who else would be there. Ray. He wasn't speaking. He was attending as a guest of another company. His old firm had merged with a larger entity, and he had taken on what he liked to call an advisory role. I knew what that meant. He wasn't in charge anymore. When I arrived, I kept my distance. I didn't try to create a scene. I simply took my place on the panel, clipped on my mic, and waited for the moderator's cue. The panel lasted an hour. Each of us shared our journeys, our challenges, our lessons. When it was my turn, I spoke with clarity, not with bitterness, but with certainty. I talked about what it meant to build something without mentorship or family support, how sometimes the loudest critics are the ones closest to you, and how silence, when used intentionally, can be more powerful than any argument. When it ended, there was applause. A few people came up to speak with me afterward. One of them, a quiet older man with a calm presence, said, "You must come from strong stock. To build what you've built alone takes steel." I almost laughed at the irony, but I just smiled and nodded. I didn't see Ray until I was walking toward the parking lot. He was standing near the exit, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When he saw me, he stepped forward. "That was quite the speech," he said. His tone was casual, but there was tension underneath it. "You really know how to make a point without saying names." I looked at him. "You said it, not me." He paused, as if expecting me to fill the silence. When I didn't, he tried again. "I'm still your father, Mira. We may not see eye to eye, but I'm not the enemy." I tilted my head. "You're not the enemy, but you chose your pride over your daughter's dignity for years. That's not something I can forget or ignore." He sighed. "So that's it then? You're just done with us?" I met his eyes. "I'm done pretending you were ever on my side." Then I walked past him. I didn't look back, not even when he muttered my name under his breath. The months that followed were quiet, at least from their side. No more invitations, no more voicemails. A kind of Cold War silence that I actually welcomed. My business kept growing. I partnered with another firm to expand into organizational coaching. I hired a part-time assistant. I began speaking at universities. My name started to mean something beyond my small circle. As for my family, Lena reached out once more through a mutual friend. She wanted to know if I would reconsider attending the wedding. I declined, not out of spite, but because I didn't need to be the afterthought at another family event, the one they only tolerated for appearances. Theo never contacted me again. Dax posted a vague status about family members changing when they get money. I didn't respond. Ray and Celeste faded not from my memory, but from relevance. I didn't block them, but I no longer made space for them either. And for the first time in my life, I felt free, not because I had taken revenge, but because I had finally chosen myself. They had their dinner table, their jokes, their smug sense of control. I had my own name on a door, my own people who respected me, and a life where I no longer had to shrink to fit. That was all the closure I needed, and that truly was the end. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.